She's good. Always a bad idea.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thanks to Haley. Did you want to say a word or two?
I just want to say, welcome, Library Board, to the Crozet Library, and I am available to give you all a tour. If you haven't seen the space before. It's built in 2013, and I know some of you were also here for the 10-year anniversary that we had in the fall. So yeah, I'm Haley Tompkins, and I'm happy to have you guys here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
So we have 3 members remotely participating. Somebody would like to read a motion for remote participation?
I move that Alita Childs, Meredith Cole, and Martha Ledford's requests to attend today's meeting of the JMRL Board remotely due to temporary or permanent disability or other medical condition that prevents physical attendance be approved.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Very good. Next up, minutes of the April meeting, which was held somewhere else. Yeah, so much. Nelson, that's right. Nelson. Later, thank you. Thank you. Any comments or corrections, additions to those minutes? If we get a chance to read them, I hope. Any corrections? May I have a motion to accept them as presented?
I so move.
All those in favor of accepting minutes as written?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Next up. Announcements. Okay. All right, moving on to public comments. Anybody online?
If anybody online would like to make a public comment, please use the Zoom raise hand feature now. It doesn't look like we have any takers for public comment today.
All right, great, thank you. Anybody in the room who isn't staff or trustee, so we're good, all right. We don't have continuing education this time around. David and I are working judiciously to, we'll get some continuing education for our June meeting, which will be back in Northside.
I can understand.
I'll say that a couple of times over the next hours. All right, let's talk about the Budget and Finance Committee report, please.
Okay. The committee met on May 6th. I was on Zoom, so I think you were at Gordon, right?
It was at Central.
Central. Yes. Okay. There were several questions and comments that we discussed, and I think we answered those to everybody's satisfaction. And the committee is recommending that we accept the budget as proposed. Is that right, David?
That's correct. Specifically, we were talking about the equipment budget, which would be
Right.
part of the overall vote next month for the board.
Discussion, comments? Okay. Yeah, so we'll be voting on the entire budget next month, and we do have a line item a little further down about the equipment budget discussion in a slightly broader context. Okay. All right. On to the 5-year plan discussion under the heading of old business.
I believe I can take that one. First, to answer one question that came up from the board last month. Someone asked, I think maybe it was Mike, I can't remember, specifically whether or not the state requires or any of our funding partners require a separate technology plan, which we used to have a separate entity that was a technology plan. 5 years ago, it was rolled into the 5-year plan as part of it. So the question was whether or not there were any requirements from the state. And the answer is no. There used to be a requirement to receive state I'm sorry, federal E-rate funding, but it no longer exists. So while it's still a good idea for the technology committee and the board and the staff to discuss and to work on that, there is no strict requirement. Okay, I'm gonna pop this up on the screen then for viewing. Things happening on the screen. So the board got a first look at this last month. This is the same version that the board looked at last month. I did get a few points of clarification, questions from the board. I thought I would just go through those now and let you know, what's going to change. Basically, they were pretty minor little clarifications. And then the board can discuss as they like about whether or not there are any other changes that need to happen between now and June, in which hopefully the board will be comfortable voting on this plan as our strategic plan. Okay, so customer focused was in here, and there was a suggestion that there be a hyphen. So that sounds good, that will happen. The reason that it's not updated yet is one, I wanted to share it with you, and two, we're waiting from the for a editable version from our the graphic designer who worked on this with JMRL. There's patrons information seeking behavior at some points, and the punctuation is in the wrong place there. It should be PATRONS apostrophe rather than what we have, which is PATRON''S.
Where is it?
Uh,
All the way on the right,
Yeah. So
under strategies, yeah, close, there you go. One past it.
patrons right here.
Okay.
There's a phrase, provide the JMRL staff, and that's the next bullet point. And the suggestion was just to have provide JMRL staff with the resources needed to deliver. I think on the next page, there's a more than 1.6 million. This was identified by the committee as well. And it says more than 1.6 million. So it's just a typo, just to be changed. There's a phrase in here where we talk about collections in a way that could probably use some expansion. It says diverse collection. And the suggestion was diverse collection of materials, just so the public would know. We assume people know what collection is going to be and maybe not. So to add that there. And then a suggestion back on the front page under the cultivate a welcoming environment. Felt like the feedback that came from members of the public and library staff largely had to do with security of physical spaces, and that might be a stronger word rather than safe spaces, so that we clearly identify what the request was. So we're just changing that from safe spaces to secure spaces, or maybe safe and secure. Whatever. We're a little limited in what we can change because of the very precise nature, so one or the other. And that was it for the suggestions that came from the board back to me or Meredith on this. So is there anything else that the board members have identified or thought about that would require a change? Go ahead.
I mean, I don't really, this is so different from what we used to do, where you really had very specific goals. And that's what I'm used to with other organizations, where you have a goal. And it looked like to me that when you talk about previous strategic plan outcomes, these are much more specific
Measurable
outcomes. And so I just wonder, just general, I guess the value of something so broad as this that will get lost in the next 5 years, and some of the specific goals that we have won't get addressed. Like, I think one of the most important goals we have in the next 5 years is to get this central library renovation underway, and it's not even there.
No,
So I worry about that. That's the only thing I don't understand philosophy, current philosophy behind this.
Did you take a look at the materials that I sent from the state library, the guidance for writing?
Sorry.
Yeah, so this is the shift
Yeah,
that's been made. So this is the recommendation from the state on how to write strategic planning now. But it needs to come with a parallel document that's here are the measurables. The thinking is that what we're giving out to the world is broader, like this, like here's what your library is going to do for you. Here's what we believe in. So in some ways, it's more akin to a mission and values type statement to the world.
yeah.
And then in-house, we match that up with the things that need to happen. So the staff are working, and I showed it's not ready for consumption yet, but there is a parallel document that has all those measurables, saying when it's due, what the outcome is going to be, who's the responsible party. And this certainly will have a lot about, well, it might just be one thing about the central library
Yeah.
renovation project. So that documentation will exist and it will be available, but it's not what we're giving out to the world.
And I'm sorry, and I apologize for reading the back.
Yeah.
But why did they make that shift? I mean, why can't the world? There are patrons. Why can't they know?
I'm gonna say something here based on my experience. The last time I did a strategic plan for the library, which I gotta admit was the early part of the 2000s, okay?
Mhm.
The document was so impenetrable. I mean, there were strategies and goals and methodology, and it was all text, and it was all there. And I could almost, even I, as a committee member, wouldn't read it unless forced to, because it was so dense, okay? And I can see what the state library is doing here. I
Yeah,
can see that they're trying to put a brand on it. And then say, for further information, click here, which, seems to me to be a general trend in society, okay? We know, we only have your attention for 30 seconds, okay? You want more information, go here. And, David's right. I mean, the staff is hard at work putting together this list of what I, so impolitely referred to as impenetrable.
which will be
methodologies.
available to the public.
Oh, yes.
We can do whatever we like with
Yeah.
it. It's meant to be a staff document. It's not meant to be like a board policy statement. What I was thinking was that we would treat it like the employee handbook in which the board would endorse it, the board would get annual updates on it, the board can provide feedback for here are specific things we want to make sure are in this plan. And then we could link it to the public. I mean, it's not going to be as pretty and as digestible.
Yeah,
It's going to look like that, what I just showed you. We can make it pretty and digestible.
yeah.
I think Tony is right. I think that's the main reasoning is to give people something that they'll actually engage with and read.
Yeah.
And that the
It
thinking
just
was
seems
that
like
they
such an
want-
extreme.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see what Tony's saying, that was too dense, but how is this any different from Arlington's?
I think one of the problems is we only do this every 5 years.
Yeah,
And so you get these major paradigm shifts, because it's only 5 years. If you did it every year, you might have sort of worked into that secondary, this kind of thing from the complete text type of thing. But, all of a sudden, every 5 years, you say, what, we need to do it again. Okay, now we're doing it in this format, and then 5 years from now, I'm sure to think what we dealing.
Yeah, I hear you, and it's a very dramatic change that we spent a year working.
I know.
So, if the
No, I
board wants to
appreciate
do
the
something
work
different.
that went into it,
Yeah.
it just seems so broad.
Yeah.
And so generic to any library. Really,
I've had some of that same thought process where I'm trying to understand the right balance of communicating essentials in an accessible way to the public, but also understanding, well, here's what that means in terms of what's going to happen. And it's very similar actually to what we face with the policy at the policy level all the time. It's like, hey, we want to do X, does it belong in the broad policy of outcomes and goals? And we want to make sure we're communicating the right level of detail to the public, what we're going to do, or does it land in procedure that it's really an operational day-to-day type of decision? And what we land on is we've got these policies and they have various levels of detail, but the internal procedure is available. It's a public document like anything we do, so people could get it. I think David might I think what I would like to see is, let me phrase it this way. I would feel most comfortable if I'm adopting this plan, that I'm adopting both the high level 30,000 foot view and endorsing at the same time the implementation plan, because I can see great, I voted for this 30,000 foot bullet, but without the implementation of what are we gonna do to achieve that? I don't know really what I've just said. I've just said, hey, it's an aspiration sort of, rather than having something behind it that I can also see and feel confident that, rather than a general level of confidence in the staff, is to have a specific level of, okay, I know and understand we're doing this, that, and the other. So ideally, to me, both those would be sort of presented together and happen at the same time. I think I kind of alluded maybe to a little bit of this last month.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable expectation or request. I'm not sure that addresses Ann's issue.
Well, as long as
I'm overlapping,
yeah, I
kind
mean,
of.
as long as the public has access to
Right.
that.
I'm
Otherwise, make
I'm
my-
wondering to address the access question and also the in-depth aspect. Can we put some way for the public to link to the more in-depth on this particular handout?
Sure.
I think I would also be in favor of that if we can get that,
So we're gonna have
timing wise.
plans.
No, it's just like policy and procedure. Here's the plan and here's internally our, you've told me you have a staff plan. So yes, we do have 2 plans. In fact, we have a 5-year plan and a staffing plan.
Yeah.
We're just providing a little bit of visibility. If you really want to see the staff plan, here's how you link through and look at it. But one question I have is just with timing. I know we were, hoping to vote on this next month.
Yeah.
What is the requirement for that?
To be eligible for state aid.
Yeah, so it's a deadline next month. Okay, so how do you, and you said last month and also just now that the staff plan is in various levels of completion, and of course, link can link to a live document that updates, but how, if others here have the same idea that we would be accepting both at once, how do you feel comfort level in terms of the time frame?
It is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have one really, really little tiny graphic nitpick.
Probably the same one I have.
Is it the
Yeah.
blue circle?
Yes.
There is, I think it got lost in the translation. into
Oh,
the,
oh,
let's see, it's probably.
Doesn't drive me nuts.
I think what we're,
That's what.
all right,
It got lost
Okay.
into a PDF, yeah.
somewhere there's a PDF.
So what I'm hearing, the board's direction for staff is to complete these parallel staff objectives, which are 20-some pages long at this point. That's not that bad, actually, 8 pages.
or just at least a, draft,
Yeah, the goal was to have a draft version
A
ready,
draft.
so that's not a new
vote on them
thing, yeah,
together.
that's what the board should expect.
Yeah,
The question is about the level of access that we want for the public, so there's not a lot of real estate on here for new stuff. It could be in how we present it to the world, like right now, the 5-year plan it's linked directly under about, there's a 5-year plan. So one option is just to add another link under this that would be like 5-year plan objectives, something like that. So they would be right next to each other here rather than adding it directly on the document. Do you think that would meet needs here, or is it vital that it be on the document?
I like the idea of it being on the document, and if you look at the very top right-hand side of the document where you've got Grow, Learn, Connect, JMRL.org, you could move that over and you could put, like more information there or something like that in a small line at the bottom of the document. So there is a place for direct.
Okay, we will try to find a place for that.
And you could, there may be pros and cons of how you want to frame this, because one way is to say, oh, we have two plans, another is to say, this is the high level visual overview.
Right.
And then you can go look at the full plan. And, but you could go either way.
I think we have for state aid and other
Yeah.
state requirements, we have to have one thing that's called the
The
five-year
plan.
plan. This is it.
Okay.
This is the one that follows the state's.
Correct.
guidance.
Okay.
Agreed.
Got
So the back, the internal, we need a different name for.
Yeah,
I wouldn't use the word plan necessarily, just implementation details.
nice.
Right now, it's called parallel staff objectives, but we'll come up with something that sounds better than parallel staff objectives to clearly tie the two together.
Five-year plan
Yeah.
implementation.
Implementation plan, that's pretty
Yeah.
good. Okay.
And to me, it kind of fits with the previous outcomes, if you,
Mhm.
that might be the place to try and shoehorn a link in. Give them a link.
Down here
Yeah, I guess it would have to be somewhere with that headline,
in the headline.
yeah, or, yeah, next up, the next. Put here for.
I think I might like that better than at the top, Martha. Would you be all right if it ended up at the bottom?
Oh, yeah. No problem.
Okay,
Yeah, conceptually, it's just sort of, here's a little bit of more detail.
And I think this is all positive
Yeah.
in my mind, because these previous strategic plan outcomes are exciting. That's like the greatest thing that's happened in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And so I think that, it's good to be positive as we look forward, how we want to grow.
okay, so we can expect some time on that next month.
Yes, yeah.
And in the meantime, if there are things, so if the board's expecting a more fully fleshed out draft of that other document, if there are thoughts that you have, like the central library needs to be, prioritized and called out by name there, please send them to me now so that we have time to work them in there. And it's not a board level document that, what did I just say? We're gonna call the implementation plan. So we can adjust that and have the board review it annually for a kind of
Yeah.
reauthorization, yep, that still sounds good. Right. So it's more flexible than this plan, which is our 5-year plan, although this is also, board at any moment could change. What needed to happen.
If you're asking for feedback on the implementation plan in
Yeah.
progress, do we have a link to that?
I
Is it something you
believe I
shared?
sent one, but I'm not sure about that actually, but I'll send one.
All right.
And I can resend if you want to see that state document to see what their reasoning was. I can resend. Okay, great. Thank you all.
Okay, very helpful. Thanks, guys. All right, next up, second reading of policy 4.53, community partnerships, which was in your handouts.
So we looked at this last month and there was some board discussion about some wording here and there. Not funny, here we go. So the red is essentially the tweaks that we made together last month. And there, David has kind of reconsolidated everything into what looks more like a final version. We did send this back through just by email to the policy committee for any suggestions or feedback on the board's tweaks, and I think there was none.
Well, that last bullet there is a new sentence, the last bullet in the bullets there.
Okay.
The library outreach, that's been added since the board saw this last month.
Okay.
We got the concept, this was, Brandy was, let's make sure to get this out here, but that's new language that came from Ann, thank you.
It's just the consistent, the language makes it consistent with the other bullet.
Great.
I think what we understood as the goal was to make sure that, so we talked about this document as being not just explaining how to partner, but here's the existing ways to partner. And so something in there about outreach, either bringing a group or to come to visit you. So that's it. That's the language there.
So a formatting point, it looks like the third line of the first paragraph is a different size font.
This one here, the form of program partnerships.
Yeah, when you get to partnerships, exchange and everything else like that.
Subscribe.
It might be my computer. I don't know.
You know,
No, on this document, it's actually.
I think it's probably, again, some translation into this document that we're looking at, so. I'll take a look and make sure that the one that, if the board approves one today, the one that gets up doesn't have that same kind of. I don't know how to describe it.
we'll call it hinky font.
Third line hinky.
Discussion from the board about this? Are we ready to take a vote? No. Motion to accept policy 4.53 as written and amended?
I so move.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, all right, thank you, everybody. All right, on to our equipment budget discussion for fiscal year 25. Again, in your handouts.
So this is the document starting on page 7 that Alita was referring to, that the board budget finance committee took a look at. It's basically in the spring, every branch or department at JMRL identifies equipment needs, which are paid for out of the equipment fund. So these are requests for the equipment fund, and that comes from revenues that JMRL takes in. Largely, it has been fines and fees historically. But there's a certain level of detail on here. We're expecting at the end of this year to have a healthy balance there. We're expecting to expend a big chunk of that and to get in, if nothing else changes, $175,000. So we're gonna spend more than is coming in next year, which was a discussion that the committee had. But still leaving a healthy balance at the end of next fiscal year. So this time, well, end of June next year. So there's a lot of line item detail on here, and I'm happy to entertain any questions there. The one thing that the committee did discuss was the fact that in the central library here, we've got several different book trucks. They are specific different things for different purposes. One might be to display books, one is to cart them from here to there. So each one of those is a different item to be ordered. The only other thing I wanted to mention that the committee briefly talked about is that likely JMRL is going to need to replace one of our box trucks at some point in the next year or so. So JMRL's business manager's here, Jerry Carchidi. He and I are recommending that the board address that mid-year after we have the final numbers from the audit, or at least we know what they're going to be. We can decide then if that would be a better an equipment budget, an equipment expense out of our equipment fund, or whether it should come from another source such as the operating fund or our fund balance. So I'm just putting that bug in now that we might come back in the fall and ask for funds for that, and that's probably a 6-figure cost. But now Jerry and I are available to answer any questions that the full board would have. There's no vote required today. This will just get appended to the full board budget that will get voted on next month. But if you would like something changed between now and next month, now's pass that along.
I think we had some good comments last month's meeting about what exactly is this line item and so forth and so on. So that was good.
That just for board interest, I'm sure you already know this, but all of the committee meetings at JMRL are also recorded and available. So if you wanted to go back and watch, policy committee from last month, or what the budget committee's discussion was, or what the 5-year plan committee's discussions have been, those are all on JMRL's YouTube page.
So just for my own review, and I think it's always just useful to reiterate, if you go to page 7, summary, the expense is funded essentially by our fines and fees collection. I mean, that's how we choose to allocate funds right now in our budgetary practices.
It comes from the equipment budget, which is largely funded by that amount, not entirely, and we're gonna, there's a separate discussion about that to follow this, but yes.
Okay, and then page 10, so on that one, you saw a revenue summary.
Yeah.
And page 10 is just a breakdown of, if you scroll down a little more, there you go. That's the amount that we're projecting No, that did go in,
This
this is passed.
Yeah, this is the next new business item.
Yeah,
So they're very closely related.
I see.
But one of the 5-year plan objectives, to Ann's point about how specific they were from the last 5-year plan, was to come up with this revenue analysis. So we're gonna give that after this.
Okay, but just keeping it on the high level, what actually went into the equipment fund from all sources, and here they are broken down, was this 181.
Exactly.
Thanks.
Any other questions about that? Good time to move into that next item on the.
Yeah, that might make sense.
Um,
And we can always back up if that.
yeah,
impacts the-
yeah.
So I just like to keep the high level, the budget is. I find it interesting that we have these kind of defined inflows and defined outflows of where,
And in most cases, it's historic.
what slots in where, and it may be historical, but I just like to keep reviewing that for myself, because it's
Yeah, so
useful to understand.
state aid goes to buy materials. And this, here's our broad brush. State aid goes to buy materials. Jurisdictions pay for operational costs. Equipment budget is funded out of fines and fees, and programming costs come from the Friends.
Those are the.
That's a very
Got it.
big simplification, but yeah.
Wait, do that again, say that again. The state we use for materials.
Materials, yeah.
It means books.
Books, DVDs,
Yeah,
and ebooks and things like that too.
that's the big,
That's the big one, yeah.
and then I know about the Friends do programs.
Right. And then
Fines do.
fines do the equipment budget that you see here. The first one is, well, not the first one, but the biggest one is jurisdictional costs, operational costs, keeping
Oh,
them on.
okay.
And that's all our 5 jurisdictions.
And that's by each of the libraries have different
Right, right.
costs.
And again,
That's what we did back in November. We went over.
So again, that breakout is largely historical. JMRL has done it this way since the dawn of time. And what I think we're about to discuss on a broader scale is, does it make sense to move the equipment budget somewhere else and potentially do away with most fines and fees?
So, and some of those buckets that you described are codified in the regional agreement
That's
too.
true.
Since
Yeah.
it just says, here's who's responsible for what on some level. So that also needs to be part of the conversation, but. Specifically, what the next page that Mike brought up here, this is page 10, is staff's answer to 5-year plan goal. Objective number 6, I can't remember which goal it was, but it's objective 6. It says in fiscal year 2023, restructured deposit transmittal forms and procedures to isolate revenue received exclusively from fines. In fiscal year 24, run fiscal analysis to determine the impact of a fine-free library. Findings will be reported to the library board. So this discussion here is staff's completing that task. If you remember, this one got pushed a year because the previous business manager discovered that not all the inflow was specifically the big thing, I think, was between fines for late materials and damage for damaged or lost materials. Those were all kind of coming in one pipe, and it was hard to squeeze out which was which. Jerry's been able to do that. So this is the revenue coming in fiscal year 2023. And he's broken it down into 7 categories here.
And we are currently in fiscal year 24.
Right, this is the year that ended last June, so this is a complete year. We don't have complete data for the year yet because we've got 2 months left. But our business manager has developed systems that will make it a little bit easier to pull this information moving forward. So if the board wanted a to date, year to date, we could pull that in a way that wasn't possible a couple of years ago.
And what are fees again? What does that refer to?
Jerry,
Primarily photocopying.
faxing, yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
75%.
Printing things, yeah,
So late fees are in the fines.
yes.
Line item.
Right.
Okay.
So contributions, just straight people giving money into JMRL. Fees, thank you, Jerry, for that reminder, are cash that staff accepts for services that we provide, largely kind of copying, fax machines, things like that. Fines are overdue fines, whether it's for items that are returned overdue or renewed overdue. So you're 3 days late in renewing and there's a fine for that 3 days. They're in the same pot right here. Lost and damaged are materials that somebody has to pay for because they've either lost them or damaged them. They're not, we can't put them back in the into the circulating collection. Uncategorized, remind me, Jerry, what that amount was. It was largely,
It's primarily from Square.
Square,
It is what it says right now. We're doing a little bit more research to find out where those should be from.
so Square is the online point of sale system where you can come in and pay right at the desk for something. We didn't have prior to the pandemic. We only had one, and once the pandemic happened, we're looking for cashless solutions. Every branch has one now. They all have predetermined categories, so that if someone comes in to pay a fine, staff can press fine, and then they pay, and it gets recorded as a fine. But you can also just hit an amount and select it. So this is probably largely fines and fees. But it was staff not categorizing it, basically.
Right.
Hence the categorized.
As if you really wanted to estimate that out, you could figure out the statistical breakdown of categories of your categorized, and
Yes,
then just
and
allocate
it would
that.
probably be
10K.
that same percentage,
Right.
somewhere ballpark
Right.
in that percentage. Out of area fees, this is revenue that JMRL takes in. We take in money, but this goes back to the jurisdictions. It's written in our regional agreement that we don't take that money, we give it back to them as a credit, basically, on their third quarter invoice payments. So if somebody lives out of area, they pay $30 a year. We keep track of it, the funds come in here, and then we charge that jurisdiction $30 less for each one of those individuals.
But some of that's paid for by the CACF.
The Friends, through the CACF, subsidize Scottsville residents who have a Scottsville mailing address
Oh, right, right.
to basically have this paid for by the Friends of the Library.
And that's included in this 16,000.
Yes, no, I'm not sure. We had this discussion the other day.
It's a very common form of
Yeah,
content.
we're not getting, it's probably not here because there's no money coming into the library. It will be included in what, or should be included in what we tell Albemarle they owe less this amount. But it's not revenue coming in because nobody's paying the library $30.
When you say it goes back to the jurisdictions, I'm not.
Yes,
It's a credit on the budget, basically.
on the bill that we sent.
But like, okay, so, but is this folks who are completely outside of,
They don't live in Charlottesville, Albemarle, Green, Louisa, or Nelson.
so what jurisdiction does it go back to?
It depends on where they get their card made, basically. If it's in Louisa, it goes back to Louisa
So it
County.
doesn't mean that they're from there, it's just.
No.
No, it depends on where they're making their card.
Okay.
And if it's in Charlottesville, the money goes back to Albemarle. Charlottesville doesn't recoup any out of area fees. All of Charlottesville goes to Albemarle, but if a card's made in Green, Louisa, or Nelson, the funds go back to that jurisdiction. And that's codified in the regional agreement, so that would need to be changed.
So it's mostly in Nelson, where Fluvanna and Buckingham County. people
There are quite a
using it.
few in Louisa as well, people like Anna.
Oh, there's that way.
You haven't pulled up the map, it's not really ready for prime time. There's a map that'll show you the dots of
Yeah.
where they are.
Mike's been working on a GIS program that shows where the dots are for where everybody lives. I think we'd like to do a CE about that at some point, when it's closer to ready, but
But other than those, Nelson and Louisa, there are other, are there
we
other-
get them at all locations. Yeah.
Interesting.
It's not a whole.
Scottsville is the big one because it really, like, you can live in the town of Scottsville and be a Fluvanna resident, but you live in the town, basically. And then Buckingham, of course, is right across the river there, but our bookmobile goes to Zion's Crossroads, which is also Orange, Fluvanna, Louisa. It's two out of three aren't there. We get people from Madison County that come to the Greene County Library. They're not as close, but they, they're close enough, so. And Northside gets a fair amount.
Just
Because people are,
drive-
just people are-
somewhere, yeah.
Yeah.
Or visiting or, for whatever reason.
So can I say something about my interpretation of this, just to
Yes.
see if if it aligns with how other people see it? So, like for me, each of these line items could be a different discussion, or like at least there's different philosophical principles involved in whether or not, people should, pay for their photocopies versus, pay for a book that they were a week late in returning, right? So they're not all the same in terms of thinking about, how do we feel about these? And then for each one, it's not all or nothing, right? So like with fines, there are, you could sort of say, oh, kids don't pay fines, or, folks, with a certain socioeconomic situation don't pay fines. So that, in thinking about the possibility of, it's not necessarily just removing them, there could be somewhere in a sliding scale.
Currently, juveniles do not pay fines.
Right, so that's an example.
That's the
Yeah, but
case.
Peter, I see what you're getting at here, that each of these particular lines, just individually, if we were going to not use the money for.
Yes.
Equipment.
Yes.
Yeah, am I,
Yeah, and then my last piece was just that, is it roughly fair to say, see if my math's right, that the whole of this is about 2% of the budget?
Jeez.
Like, right, what I did. Yeah.
Jerry says yes. So for the objective that was in the 5-year plan, so to isolate revenue received exclusively from fines, the answer is probably on an annual basis somewhere around $100,000, somewhere. That's the amount that we're getting from overdue fines that then goes to buy equipment for the library.
Right.
So that's the completion of that 5-year plan goal. Now it's up to the board to decide what to do with that information moving.
and David, I think you have some perspective, regional, statewide perspective on this particular issue.
Yes, Peter, you asked an excellent question last month about identifying a library to come and talk. So specifically, I'm looking for a library that had to replace that revenue in some way or the other. So I'm having, as we mentioned, different libraries are built differently, and some of them that are just a department of a jurisdiction, they never saw any revenue anyway. It goes into the general fund of their county or whatnot, So losing fines and fees was not, if their county was willing to do it, then it didn't impact the library at all. So I'm looking for another library that none in the state is quite set up like we are. So the closest is probably in Harrisonburg. So I'm trying to get their director from the Massanutten Regional Library to come and talk to us about that. But they were able to make it work. They came up with other plans. Depends on what the board's goals are here. I have some thoughts on how this could get done. If the board comes to me and says, we want to do this, then staff have been discussing, like, what would that mean? What are the options that we could have? One thing that the budget committee talked about last week is this whole block here in tech services costs, which is, this is page 9 of your handouts, $181,000, not all of this, but a large amount of this are recurring software costs that were bought as out of the equipment fund because we were coming from a model, as Tony says, things get baked in 50 years ago, coming from a model where if you wanted software, you bought a CD, you loaded it in the computer, you own that software, and that world has changed. So now we have annual costs for things that we operationally use every day, like your email. There's a cost in here for the Google Workspace subscription. It's $11,000 a year. JMRL needs to have email for staff. We can't work without it. So is that an equipment cost? Is it a thing, a tangible thing, or should this be an operational cost? So there's a talk about moving some of these into the operational budget, which means that we need our jurisdictional partners to be on board with funding that. It means taking this money out of here and putting it into the operational budget. We could probably recoup some fines, some of that revenue in that way, designate, money that now this $11,000 we could designate for a piece of hardware, whatever.
So yeah, it would take some real fine tuning of this particular equipment budget as a representative in order to say, okay, this is how much it's going to cost us if we do this.
Yep. And
And then come up with some scenarios. All right, if we take the entire software maintenance budget and say that, now we're going to pay for that out of state aid, that's one way to look at it. Or because it's an operational cost, we're going to take it to the jurisdictions, then we've got to split it up theoretically on the regional agreement by the number of jurisdictions and circulation the way we do with other, so it's complicated.
I think the CACF is an option for funding. We've discussed in the past. Speaking of the jurisdictions, we know that there's a bill coming in the next few years for a new salary plan that is going to be, regardless of what level it is, the results are not going to come back and say that JMRL staff are well paid or they're comparable to our peers. So there's going to be a big ask on that front. So the board is going to have to work with our jurisdictions on what their priorities are too. There are some, to Peter's point, you know, I have staff that are advocating automatic renewals as a way to kind of have this, you know, to look at this. Basically, that would be that overdue fine for the 3 days that you didn't renew it late. It would only happen at the tail end if you didn't return the books on time. That's a discussion the board could have. That I know some people would say, well, you know, I don't read every email that comes in from the library, so I'd be surprised if they overdue at the end of my 2 renewals or whatnot. Talking about what we charge for printing and things like that. We do not currently charge for notaries. We do a ton of notarizations. There were 300 some last year. It's capped by law. You can do, I think it's $10 you can charge. So that's, we could charge for that service, but then right now we're providing it as a free service to our patrons, you know, is that?
People just go to the bank or somewhere else and then go.
Well, we're finding more and more that the banks are sending people to us. They won't notarize unless it has to do with your bank account. If you come in with something, you know, you got a last will and testament or something, they're not.
If you look on Nextdoor, everybody's sending them to the. Anyway, again,
Yeah, that's a complicated, because there's some voting, you know, documents that have to get notarized, and they go to the library.
Yes, the people from the registrar's office come in, like if somebody wants to get on a ballot, they need X amount of signatures and those need to be notarized.
Yeah.
Mailed-in ballot has to be.
and I think it might be, you know, and
Maybe, it
this
has
is
to be witnessed.
digression here, but if you start charging for notary services, fewer people are going to want notary services, and that line item is going to decrease in value. The same way when you increase the cigarette tax, certain people stop smoking, so, you know, you increase the cigarette tax, but fewer people smoke.
I think about it as the out of area fee in 2009 and 10, when JMRL and the jurisdictions were talking about that, they had a projection of revenue for it based on the people that had cards. That would then, everybody would pay $30, and they found that it was a much smaller percentage. It was under 50% of those folks did. I think Mike is trying to.
Oh, just a couple of thoughts. So I think today, the scope of today's agenda item is mostly to present this analysis, and this is a great important step that, hey, if we were just eliminating the fines row, this would be the financial, and the answer is at 100K, you know, plus or minus. And it sounds like there's enough interest in the room that we'll probably have continuing conversations about the overall impact of, you know, or options. Here's different models or options that we could use. And I think it's great to not reinvent the wheel. If there's other organizations that have gone through this, let's learn from that for sure. A couple questions in my mind looking down the road about, as we've kind of learned from others, are, and I've heard at least one member of the public kind of ask this question or have this feedback. If the fine is not there, how does that affect your hold times and the checkout patterns? What's the incentive to get it turned back in? And that must, I imagine I would imagine it have an effect on circulation patterns. So
Do we have an answer to that? I mean,
I think we have national data on that.
Yeah.
We don't have a way of saying, because right now we have never not charged fines, basically. So we don't.
But
we don't
other
have our full data.
jurisdictions don't.
But are there other jurisdictions that have stopped charging fines?
Yes,
And
that's what we can find
Yeah.
other.
Yes, so I'm just throwing that
Yeah.
out as a point of interest to me as we do this information gathering process. A second question is, one, and I've heard this from feedback from members of the public, or one thing I hear is that, well, a reason to, or I should say, some members of the public are reluctant to check things out from the library because they're worried that they'll get fined at some point and they're not set up to, you know, be comfortable handling that. It seems to me the discussion is there would still be a model where if you just never return it, it gets marked as lost at some point, and then you get charged for it at that point, and it's actually a higher number than the little 25 cents per day. For people who are where the 25-cent fine is a barrier, if we took that away, would the eventual risk of being charged for a lost item, does that still remain as a barrier? Just what are the this is sort of a psychological question among various segments of the service area, but again, have there been studies or surveys nationally? That's just something I'd like to.
I'd have to look and see. I can say that of every library that I'm aware of that has gone fine-free, they still charge for lost and damaged materials.
Correct. So, but my question would be,
Is that?
if we went fine-free to to reduce a barrier to being exposed to a financial penalty, if that eventual financial penalty is still there, did the barrier actually get removed, or to what extent did it get removed?
Yeah. What's the current policy? Like if I check out a book and then the library contacts me and says, you know, you haven't returned this book, you need to return it, and I say I already returned it, what's the policy? Is there like a, you know, is it?
Yeah, we have a claims returned, basically. So, you know, so you're saying you think you returned this.
Right.
So first, the staff will work with you. You know, we can get Brittany to come in and talk about this, or even Haley might be able to chime in. This happens with some frequency. The first response is usually, okay, I'm gonna, you know, we'll kind of put a pause on it here. We're gonna go look on the shelf. We're gonna check everywhere. We're gonna see if it's here at the library. We're gonna check all of our other libraries, any other place that might have been returned. What I used to tell people at that position was, at the same time, we're gonna look in all of our nooks and crannies. Can you check in all of your nooks and crannies? Look under the driver's seat of the car, look behind the kid's bed, you know, all the places where things would get lost there. And then 9 times out of 10, well, 7 times out of 10, maybe that comes back
Yep.
with a, Brittany texts me, I would be happy to talk to the board. That resolves the issue. Either it gets found at one place or the other. If it doesn't, we have a kind of, a claims return process where at the end, somebody in authority will make a distinction saying, okay, we believe you that you say you returned it. We'll take this off of your account and we'll allow that to happen, but only once or twice,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah,
Like
okay.
if somebody repeatedly is doing that, then it blocks their card.
Okay, good. Yeah, because I've had it happen both ways where I screwed up and found it.
Right.
Yes.
And then when they screwed up and found it.
Certainly, you know, we are dealing with hundreds of thousands of items coming in and out, things slip through the
Yeah.
cracks. Haley says 3 times you can do a claim return, no more after that. Thank you.
Okay, good.
No, I think what we're talking about here, as Mike has said, and others have said, an ongoing discussion about this and some more, again, somebody from another jurisdiction, another library system come in, talk to us about how they did this as close to our set of circumstances as possible. Maybe some scenarios, if we were to, you know, charge for things we're not charging for now, or a thing where we're only going to take fines out of the equation, different places to actually pay for that, jurisdictions, materials budget, CACF, that kind of thing.
Another thing that I've seen libraries do is no fines for senior citizens. So it's kind of like for seniors, so people over 65, so it's no fines for young kids and for older folks. That's, you know, something that we've seen libraries do, the overdue, they haven't gone entirely fine free. Overdue automatic renewals rather, sorry, and then limiting fines by age group. So.
I mean, I would also like to see, like a revision, an update of this equipment list. If there are things that should go into operations, we should move it over to operation.
So you want like things pulled out from there, like what it would look like without that?
Yeah, what you think would be, you know, just makes sense. Just
Yeah, I can
update.
provide that information with the caveat that we still need to pay for these things for next year and they're not in the operational budget
Yeah,
currently.
this would be a.
For informational purposes,
Yeah.
though, sure. We'll set that out.
I mean, if there's, you know, if it seems obvious that it's really a.
It's all in
Needs to
that
be
one
updated.
area. The rest of the things that people have asked for here are all hardware, you know.
Yeah.
It's cash register, charging station, laser cutter, like these are things. It's all in that
But
one
that software
section.
section, if we could pull some of this, if it makes sense, that it should be in operation.
That would be interesting to look at.
Yeah, but when you have to have the jurisdictions say, agree to pay for that?
Yeah, that would have to come a year. We would have to start talking to them in the fall. It would have to be in the operational budget for not starting July 1 this year, but starting July 1 next year.
Yeah,
Right,
They've already agreed for what they're gonna pay for this year, and it does not include these things.
right.
But certainly we can provide that information.
I think that would be, I think this is a discussion, again, we don't want to be behind the curve on this.
We are.
Yeah, but we don't want to be.
So that's one more big picture. If you go back to page 7. At least for this year snapshot that's shown here, you're already 125K under in terms of outflow and inflow. Is there a reason for that you can speak to, but I'm just pointing out, if we're talking about 100K somewhere else, we've already been solving this, at least on this 1 year snapshot that I'm looking at. Yeah, do you have any comments from that standpoint?
Yeah, we have been, so the budget committee also discussed this briefly, when we met a few weeks ago. This is a high balance that we're keeping here, so, my inclination was to say yes to the needs of our branches, basically. So I think in the past, we might have been more discerning and saying like, oh no, we don't actually need this, AED is pretty important. This shelving for the bookmobile, we would cut it down before bringing it to the board, so it would be closer there. We also know that some of the budgeted expenses will shift throughout the year. There will be things that will be cheaper, we can get cheaper. There will be shipping costs that we can negotiate, things like that. So this is the very conservative estimate there. Jerry's got his hand up.
Yeah, and historically, this came up with the prior meeting that there have been years when we've provided more revenue than we spent, so it fluctuates. So it's
But
obviously.
if your overall high level point is that, we're already starting to run a little deficit here and we're talking about removing revenue, then I agree that we need to figure out how to bridge that gap. And Jerry's worked up some scenarios already saying, if we didn't do anything and remove that revenue, here's how many years we could move forward like we are, and that's something we could provide to the board.
So I'm thinking at least for an agenda item going forward, we would have this as an agenda item with presentation, instead of a general discussion, have a presentation of scenarios.
Yeah.
And Jerry's been volunteered to bring those scenarios. So
I guess I can imagine, Tony, at least two sessions. One would be sort of a general information gathering, as David is talking about, and then these types of questions would get maybe surfaced. And then based on some of that information gathering and questions that came back, then there could be scenarios. But I certainly agree that would be one of the milestones before we get a decision is, hey, here's the scenarios that we're looking at based on, what we've learned so far and what our priorities.
I will say that we are going to be short one business manager for the July and August board meetings. So any presenting will have to come to me, which means that it will have to be high level. And if math questions come up, we will need to use a calculator. So just have it on your radar there. But I think the timing is it doesn't sound like the board is considering making any changes, obviously the operational budgets are already set for next year. If there was a need to discuss getting rid of this revenue now, then we would have to dramatically rethink this equipment budget. But it sounds like we're gonna move forward with next year, and then we're talking about 26 or, okay, great, thank you for that clarification.
all right. Next agenda item under new business is our board meeting and budget schedule discussions. Again, that's page 11 in your handouts. And this is for the upcoming fiscal year, which is fiscal year 25. Not a whole lot of changes here other than to put dates to some of these things.
The other thing is to rotate in the other two. So last year, the board decided that in addition to going to our 3 jurisdictional branches, so that means Green, Louisiana, and Nelson every year, we would rotate 2 other meetings.
Right.
So this follows that same format. So it'll be Scottsville and Central next year. And then the year after that would be Crozet and Gordon Avenue again, and they would just rotate on that basis moving forward. I think the only thing I wanted to highlight for the board, just for them to think about, is that there is a meeting scheduled on December 23rd. The library is open that day, but they're closed the 24th, 25th, and 26th.
I
And
was
So if the
gonna
board-
mention that,
If the
whether-
board wanted to try to adjust that, we have,
I would
Anyways.
recommend that we adjust that. I just can't think that would be problematic.
and the other thing is that we have a 1, 2, 3, 4. The board meeting would be November 24th, is that right?
25th.
25th.
5th and
Thanksgiving is that Thursday. so-
Thanksgiving, that's Thursday, so. I mean, in the past, what we've done is just move the meeting back a week. Both for Thanksgiving and Christmas, so travel plans do not interfere.
We've done the Christmas one.
I think we've done
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving, I think we've done Thanksgiving too.
My only concern about that is that's generally when the budget is voted for. So moving it up means a week less of budget data, basically,
Okay,
for the thanks, specifically for the November.
So the December, we could move up like to the 16th one day.
You could also do the November. That's the board's,
yours truly is always out of town the week of Skip.
the entire week of Thanksgiving.
Yeah, this, for 2023, we met the Monday following Thanksgiving, so.
That's right, we did, yeah. It looked, was a little earlier.
It was on the 23rd last year.
Okay.
We met the 27th.
Well, that's a possibility too, I guess. We don't count that.
We'll just wait until-
Well, you wouldn't want to move one back to November back
No,
and
yeah.
December forward. They're gonna be
Tight
tight.
turnaround. So is the suggestion then to move each of them 1 week up? So that would be on my calendar,
That would be November 17th for.
November 17th,
18. We're Mondays,
18.
not Sundays.
11, 18, and
You're
Wait,
looking at
wait.
25. We're on 24.
We are? When did that happen? Why wasn't I told?
Tony's mind is on the future. All right. So 11, 18, and 12, 16.
Yeah. That would be my preference.
Yeah, so as I said, my only concern about that is that it's a week less budget prep and that we did last year run into a problem. It wouldn't have mattered either way, where we got data after our
Mhm.
meeting, the budget, and we did take that specifically. We talked to Albemarle about it, said, would you rather the waited and gave you a budget in December or potentially January? If we know that some of these figures are coming in later and later, it was like healthcare
Well, we had
costs.
talked to
things.
Louisa last
We
year.
talked to Wanda. about
And
it,
then
too.
had changes too. The
Yeah.
numbers came in that changed.
Yes,
So-
they generally said, the jurisdictional partners, that they would rather get what we have at that point and then they could adjust later, so they'd have a starting point. And if is basically, they said November is fine, the earlier they get something.
And it isn't it usually healthcare costs?
It's usually healthcare or
Right.
retirement costs, yeah.
And that's because the insurance companies are. getting
That's
it.
correct. Okay, so the board is okay with this, with those two changes. Anything else? You'd like the still 5 traveling days?
Yeah,
That's good.
The only other change was internal, basically. We've been monkeying with when to accept some requests from managers, and this year, we had 2 things due in April. We're gonna split those apart, 1 in March, 1 in April, but those are noted on here. And that will give staff, it'll give, the budget manager and myself a little bit more time to work on that equipment fund for next year, because we'll get some information earlier, and that might be useful depending on the outcomes of these discussions about the equipment fund.
Alita, Martha, Meredith, you okay with all that?
Sounds good.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
You need a motion for this or? I don't think we need a motion, do we?
November 18th and December 16th.
Yeah, it's not a policy.
It's not a policy, it's not a.
I mean, you can have.
Everybody okay with this?
Yeah.
Okay.
We will post this though on the board page so that people will know what the schedule is.
All right, thank you, everybody. Library Director's Report.
Okay. So speaking of budgets, the state passed a budget last week, which included $2.5 million for state aid for this year for the entire state, of which JMRL is the second largest recipient. So that means that our amount for state aid for materials for next year is likely to go up. We don't have the estimates yet. We should get those this week, but it means the number that you look at in your budget next month is going to be different than what we've been discussing since November. So we didn't know until the state finalized that was the case. This puts the formula at 95% funded, with year 2 of the biennial budget, including an additional 2.5 million, which would mean, if that holds in fiscal year 26, full funding for state aid for the first time since 2001.
I can die happy.
Yes, so this is a long-standing issue. It will, so for this year, we're looking at an increase that will be put in the same line. The board will vote on it next month. We will have discussions about that moving forward. You know, again, like we have always dedicated all of that funding for materials, but here is more money coming in. And what's the best use of that for the library system? For next year, probably, we're in June, you know, it will go where state aid has always gone, but it's something to keep in mind as we discuss moving forward. Anyway, that's remarkably good news, and thanks to our supportive legislature for taking care of that. It's been 20 years. Summer reading is gearing up at all locations, so check with your local branch for information about any kickoffs. I encourage you all to track your reading this summer with the Beanstack app. I remember talking about this last year, and I'm not sure if anybody actually tried it, but adults are eligible. You are eligible for prizes, probably not the grand prize as trustees, because I would get accused of rigging it. But it's fun. It's a great system. It's just a way to log in and kind of your progress throughout the summer and you know, compete in the various library related things. Some of you may have seen a story about the loss of Head Start that had been run by MACA in our region. So MACA reached out, a board member reached out for help supporting families who found themselves suddenly without childcare for the Head Start age children throughout our region. And in response, Glennis Welty at Gordon Avenue created packs for Head Start families. Each pack had a free book, a flyer about JMRL services for kids, 5 mini lesson plans, 3 make and take kits, a beach ball, which I'm sure parents love, a box of sidewalk chocolate. And Megan Smead put together the flyer about JMRL services. So I just wanted to publicly thank JMRL's children's staff for doing what they could to step into a sudden change there, and thank the Friends for supporting that with free books for folks. The books came from.
How many packages were they?
I think they started with 55 packages for families throughout the region. So,
Yeah.
you know, Charles will have more information on those.
That's great.
The library put on a tremendously successful how-to festival last month, thanks to the work of Heather Pennick. This is an annual event, every year except 2020, I believe, maybe 2021 as well. The Builders Learn 30 Things in 3 hours. It's held at the Central Library. It was tremendous. So many thanks to staff for putting that together. My favorite was a xylophone made out of bananas. It was like a little pie, basically, a little circuit board, and it was connected to these things, and you touched one and then you could touch the rest of the bananas, and it is a big hit. And then finally, the Friends of the Library restarted their annual volunteer appreciation, which had been on hold since 2019, basically. With an event at the center at Belvedere featuring remarks from local author Mary Jean Oldham. It was very well attended, and it was very nice for the volunteers that support the Friends of the Library through the book sale and through the year-long work to get some recognition. That's all I have to report.
All good news. Okay, other matters before we talk about the agenda for the June meeting? Right. So on the agenda for June, we will have theoretically an approval of the 5-year plan committee or the 5-year plan with that added approval of the budget going forward. However, how do we phrase that? What is?
Just vote on the budget.
Vote on the budget. Okay, go.
Hoping it's approval, but the board gets to decide that.
We'll talk about again, the fines and fees and that whole equipment budget costs and so forth. Some more data.
Policy committee report.
Policy committee report. Any other committees meeting, David?
There should be.
When do we do nominations? When do we do, is that next month? In June?
Yeah, next month.
Yeah.
So there should be.
Unfortunately, I'm gonna be out of the country next month.
Good thing you've got a partner. So, right, the nominating committee will present a slate that they have looked at and the board can vote on that, but then also, yeah,
Yeah,
talk to Brandon and Ann if you have thoughts on that now. There will be continuing in about Gordon Avenue Seed Library next month.
Mhm.
And as a reminder, we're back at Northside.
Thank you. That's only two reminders so far.
Yeah.
And we will have continuing education next week.
Yeah, the Seed Library. Yeah.
All right,
And then, so the nominating committee will do their thing. And then do we vote on officers next month?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yes.
Because the officers take effect in July.
July 1st. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
Are you back? No.
What we heard from Albemarle County is there probably will not be an Albemarle County trustee in July.
There should be by the meeting.
Yeah, yeah, that's true, actually.
So there'll
So
be
we
continuity.
don't, the answers.
Yeah, they're gonna
The process is in, the wheels are in motion.
Because I noticed something interesting this morning, that the city trustees are in August, while the
Yes.
counties are in June.
They all started in July, beginning of the fiscal year, but, things happened for years and they appointed somebody in September and they went for 4 years and it just stuck with that. So the seats that the board has open are Alita's in Nelson County. There's Mike's seat in Albemarle. Both of them are eligible for renewal. The only person that is on the board that is not eligible for renewal is Kathy in Charlottesville. So Charlottesville will have a new trustee. And that's not until August, September.
So has the city posted that position?
I don't think it's been posted
I
yet.
don't think-
Yeah, because it's a bit behind the schedule.
Yeah.
As Brandy mentioned. Do you want me to give a little, hey, here's what's gonna happen? Okay, so if the board is done with the general agenda there, they are gonna go into closed session. So that's gonna require that somebody read the motion that's in your handouts there saying we're gonna go into closed session. At that point, we're gonna mute and put up a screensaver on the Zoom meeting that everybody is watching right now. Alita and Martha and Meredith, you're gonna have to leave this meeting and join the second Zoom meeting that I sent you a link for. So if you haven't seen that, it's in your email. Once that's done, the board is gonna be in that separate Zoom session. It's closed. We're gonna exit the room here and you're gonna have a closed session. When it's done, come get me and I'll return on the big meeting basically. And the 3 trustees will have to leave the closed session and come back into the big meeting, and then the board will certify their closed meeting and then close the overall meeting. Complicated enough?
Everybody got that?
So, Alita and Martha and Meredith, just call or text me if we have any tech problems, and everybody cross your fingers. I'm
Okay.
sure this will go just fine.
Okay, I'm gonna leave the meeting now.
Oh, wait,
Well, wait a
sorry.
minute, don't we have
Hold
to make that motion?
Oh, go ahead. Don't
Thank
go.
you. Thank you.
Okay,
I can read the motion, right? I'm entitled to read, I can read the motion.
Yeah, and you still got enough folks there.
Okay. I make a motion that the library board go into a closed meeting pursuant to the Code of Virginia, section 2.2-3711, subsection 8.1, to discuss the performance evaluation and employment contract of the library director. All those in favor?
Aye.
aye.
All right.
All right.
Okay, now you can leave.
You got 30 seconds, Phil.
Alita, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. Well, wonders never cease.
Actually, it was easier to get on, back on than than to
Right.
get off the first time and get into that closed session.
Good job.
Okay, I'm back.
It's work,
I
David.
think I'm back.
You can read.
Hello.
All right, well, I have two monitors now.
Okay.
Step up.
Do we need to get Sierra back in here?
No, Sierra's gone, so I will
Okay.
take any notes that need to be
Okay.
taken.
So we're going to read the certification closed meeting. Whereas the Jefferson Madison Regional Library's Board of Trustees has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this Jefferson Madison Regional Library's Board of Trustees that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved that the Jefferson Madison Regional Library's Board of Trustees hereby certifies that, to the best of each member's knowledge, one, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which this certification resolution applies, and two, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the Jefferson Madison Regional Library's Board of Trustees. All those who concur with this, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
And the resolutions to come out of the closed session was a recommendation to continue the director's contract for another period, I believe. The period was it 3 years before, a year before, annual before?
We can make a motion now.
You're asking me.
Let's make a motion to, who would like to make a motion?
I move that we renew the director's contract with the current language for a period of 1 year. And we say the raise with an escalating raise of 7% relative to the current pay rate.
All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any- Okay. All right, great. I'm gonna get everybody to just sign. Just last name there.
Thank you all. I'm honored to accept that. That's all. Grateful to-
Yeah, just last name.
But not sign, just right.
Yeah, just right. It's just a tabulation of the vote.
Okay.
And Tony, you'll have to write for Alita.
Yeah, I was gonna, do that, yeah.
And absent for Kathy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Votes. Votes. And Litchford. Remote. Absent. I think we're done.
But we should do the goals for the next upcoming year.
We're doing it.
I think the way that usually happens is there's kind of some feedback that goes back to the director. It's on our annual schedule that next month the director will present a sort of
Okay.
That prioritized goals, right?
So we
Yeah, so we have some feedback that will feed into that,
Okay,
the formulation of that. And then we'll discuss that formally next month, I believe.
And that should have been, I should have mentioned that as an agenda item for next month as well, just some presentation of goals based on that and.
so the goals that we discussed, we don't
That sort of feedback that goes to David.
have now?
No,
No, sort of out of band.
Yeah.
Some all the feedback that. Was internal to performance.
Yeah.
We'll go back to David and that'll feed into the, some formulation of goals that we'll look at formally next month.
Oh,
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn, which actually we've already done, but. No, we haven't done it, okay.
We just went into closed session. All right, I moved to adjourn.
All those in favor?
I,
Aye, aye,
Thanks, everybody.
Man,
Bye-bye.
thank you.
thank you all, I know that's a.
Well, it was a lot of
Most
fun.
complicated.
Great. So, and those of you who'd like a tour of the Crozet Library,